Okay.
Welcome to the TruthXChange podcast, the unique program where we have conversations about worldview, all through the lens of oneism and twoism. This lens is based on Romans 1:25. We have exchanged the truth of God for the lie, worship and serve creation rather than the creator who is blessed forevermore. I'm your host, Joshua Gilo. I have a special guest with me, Andrea Williams.
Great to be with you.
Andrea is the CEO over at Christian Concern. Here's a little video clip that they've pulled together. I hope that this would encourage everyone.
Christian Concern is passionate about seeing the love, justice, truth, freedom and hope of Jesus at the heart of society. We know that Jesus is Lord of all. That doesn't just mean in our personal lives, but in our churches, in the courts, on the television and in Parliament.
So we seek justice, defending Christian freedoms in the legal system and campaigning for just, righteous laws.
We speak truth, taking every opportunity to champion the goodness of God's pattern for our lives, our families, and our society on television, radio, online, and in the newspapers.
And we bring hope, helping the world to see how much better things can be when we live in line with God's beautiful design for our lives.
Well, I pray that the church would recognize what they have in Christian Concern.
Almost 4 years now, I've been fighting to clear my name, and I'm really excited today that the judges finally ruled in my favor.
I would never forget when I came into the office and there were 5 people there and they were looking at my notes and thought, they've taken this a little bit seriously. That was the first ray of hope I had.
Christian Concern, as we have just discovered, is very aware of some of these cultural issues and is very much involved in the lives of believers, specifically in the UK. And Dr. Jones has invited Andrea to be a part of our upcoming symposium, and he has introduced this symposium with a couple of questions. And he says this: what are your pronouns? How do you identify? These current cultural questions are a restatement of one of the oldest questions of the human race: who am I? Today's answers carry a beguiling temptation to define ourselves by looking within, whereas the older version implies that we should look outside ourselves, asking our Creator to tell us what we need to know. Whether in the church or the White House or at home or in our nation's schools, many in our culture, including Christians, are facing an identity crisis. This fall, the TruthXChange will be having a symposium, Stolen Identity, the Theft of the Binary in Contemporary Society. Andrea, you have been tasked with the subject of law and personhood, specifically the issue of identity politics and how they're being played, particularly in the British and European context, and how that's going to affect Western culture in general. Andrea, wouldn't it be fair of me to dump into that part of it without asking the question that we get so often at TruthXChange? Is it really important for Christians to be involved in public policy, the issues of law and church? Shouldn't we keep government out of the involvement of the church? And shouldn't the church just keep its nose out of the state? How do you respond to those kind of questions?
Absolutely not. Never has the truth of the gospel been more under attack than in the public space. And there's a sense in which that's therefore where God's people absolutely need to be, where the church needs to be giving a robust and strong and secure answer for the hope that is within us, for the truth that actually says, yes, we are made in the image of God. Yes, we are made male and female. Yes, there is truth to be known. Yes, there is clarity rather than confusion. And that is something that the world currently is longing to hear, that the Western world is longing to hear, indeed, that the political classes need to hear. And we need to send that out with a very clear sound. I feel that sometimes as Christians, we have become so kowtowed, so silenced by the political class and by the general melee of culture that we no longer have confidence in the truth that is found so powerfully in Romans 1, so powerfully across the gospel, no longer have the confidence in that to really speak it when of course it is exactly what the world needs to hear.
Do you think that lack of courage in the face of the cultural shift and in the public square is that just a lack of Christians knowing the scriptures, or even believing false things about how they should be involved? I have heard often, we don't need to bring the scriptures into the discussion. We have natural law. We could look at creation itself. And that would tell you enough that there should be male and female in marriage. That should tell you enough about the rights of the life of children inside the womb. We don't need to bring the Bible into this discussion.
Well, really, it's because we've forgotten the Bible. It's because we've forgotten Jesus, forgotten that he rules and reigns, we've forgotten that he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, forgotten that in him is the power to restore all things unto himself. And it's the power of the gospel in which there is hope. And we have diminished the gospel. We've allowed the gospel to become one truth among many in the public space. It's as if we aren't really proud of the gospel, as if we don't feel that it really has anything to offer to the general public at large, when in fact we know that what it is the answer to all the ills of society right now. And natural law is not enough. And having conservative values just in and of themselves is not enough. What matters essentially is the lordship of Christ. What matters essentially is whether or not the church really loves him, whether or not the church is really zealous for his truth, whether or not the church is really prepared to lay herself on the line for his truth where it is under attack in contemporary society at this time. And sadly, I would say for the last half a century, it's as if we've not been prepared to do that. We've not seen the attack on truth coming. We've been too quick to want to appeal to the world, to kowtow to the world, to shy from the world and allow other versions of contemporary truth to make their way into the public space as new political orthodoxy, around which, if you in the end dare to question or resist, you find yourself as a minimum at the end of being labelled bigoted or hateful, and certainly in the UK, finding yourself quite often in trouble in your workplace, if you dare to question the new political cultural orthodoxy.
Yeah, when I hear about post-Christian UK, I always can hear our friends Joe Boot or P. Andrew Sandlin or Jeffrey Ventrella, who would say, no, we're not in a post-Christian time, we're in a pre-Christian time, that the light of the gospel will come back into the UK like it was, if not greater. Having said some of those things, and those are very, very helpful, Andrea, your topic is going to be dealing with the issue of law and personhood. And I wondered if you could help our audience. Well, let's define some terms. What does it mean to be a person, or what is personhood, and how is that changing in the understanding of law, and certainly how has that changed in culture today?
Well, what's absolutely fascinating is that once upon a time, these things, and not so long ago, and I qualified as a barrister in 1988, but once upon a time, that would have seemed almost to be a nonsensical question. What is personhood? Well, you are a man and I am a woman and we are persons. And life is worthy of protection from the moment of conception to the point of natural death. And once upon a time, those concepts, a personhood, bodily integrity, male and female, those things were just understood. They didn't even need to be written. Right. They weren't legal fictions, legal concepts. They were simply truth. And I think that this is one of the things that we need to understand. You only begin to have to make a lot of laws around which you make a whole lot of other laws, when there is no law, there's a sense in which when it's become lawless, or when you have to begin to define matters, you've got into a post-war, or you've got into a post-law or a post-chaotic age. So in the 1980s, we didn't really have to define what a person was as distinct from the rest of living creatures, as opposed to an animal, or those sorts of things were. And what was protected was life, the concept of life from the moment of conception to the point of natural death. And I mean, how far that has shifted, in that some of you will know my story, but I've for the last 10 years had cancer, had cancer come back again, and the truth is, and right now I'm doing very well, but I'm therefore on regular checkups, and one of them is with my gynecologist, because my breast cancer moved to the womb, and so so I have to quite often go to my gynecologist. And I'm just saying this because this morning I had a letter from the clinic where the secretary to my consultant gynecologist gave her pronouns as she and her. So the absurdity in Britain is we've now got to a place whereby a women's clinic, a gynecology clinic, in its formal letters, has she and her. Similarly, earlier this week, we've had correspondence with our education department here in the United Kingdom, whereby the signatories on the letters define their pronouns. So you get into a place whereby on official correspondence, even on medical correspondence, you're getting to that point whereby people are defining themselves according to their pronouns. So in law, there is a battle for what it means to be male, what it means to be female. There's a battle within the equalities legislation around that. It's no longer necessarily defined by biology. And we, in March of 2022, here in the United Kingdom, have an important case in the High Court whereby a doctor who refused to say on a medical form that a biological man was a woman because they wanted to identify that, found, and this was only an in theory question, actually lost his job as a government physician. Is this the Michael Davidson case? That's the David Makaref. That's the David Makaref case. Okay. The Mike Davidson case is that's all around access. That is a case where someone who gives help to people who want to move away from same-sex attraction, all of his bank accounts are being closed, his license has been taken away. The very fact that he says that you can do this has happened. We won a very important matter of law in one of Mike Davidson's cases back in 2013, where in our Equality Act, sexual orientation, which is a nebulous legal concept because actually what it defines is your sexual practice. Yeah. But there is it's called sexual orientation as if it's fixed and as if it is innate. And it was in a Mike Davidson case whereby we got it recognized in the jurisprudence, in a judgment in that case, that ex-gay was also a protected characteristic. So wow. We at least got it recognized in law that there was such a legal class. Because what the push was, in fact, to render ex-gay invisible in effect, as non-existent. Yeah. In the public space. So going back to the original question, the fact that we begin to have to define, or that people are self-defining, means that we've got to a place whereby law can hardly contain the problems that come as a result of that. That's actually the truth about it. And these new concepts, these new self-definitions of male and female or other, are actually very often policy decisions not hard law definitions or hard medical definitions. And then you have to, the law then has to play catch up with trying to make sense of what policy decisions, soft law decisions, work out as in the public space.
So do you see a lot of injustices then being dealt because of the game of catch up?
Absolutely. I mean, so we had one of the very first cases here in the United Kingdom now some 6 years ago, whereby children in primary school, 6 and 7-year-olds, 2 little boys wanted to go into school dressed as girls.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole school was changing its gender policies, its sex policies around it, its toileting policies, its sports policies. And a Christian couple that were concerned about this, Nigel and Sally Rose, sought to raise this with the head. They received a letter back from the head, essentially to say that unless they accepted the 6-year-old child's preferred pronouns, they were transphobic. And that unless their children were prepared to accept it, that they were transphobic. And a transphobic means an unwillingness to accept the self-defining characteristic of the trans person. And so that was something that we've actually only just some 6 years later got that case into the court, because at the time, no medical person, although they would come and speak to us quietly and say, we're totally with you, no medical person would stand with us. 6 years ago. The tide has shifted since then.
Right.
But what you've seen, and since that time, we've actually seen an explosion of children identifying in the opposite gender, and even in that school, more children confused and so on.
Do you think, what's your guess on this? As we see this rise of interest of children coming out and self-identifying, changing the way they view themselves, is this a groomed thing that has been going on without parental supervision through programs, through school influence, even the culture of their neighbors who are involved with some of this type of thing, and we're just seeing more and more, and it's just snowballing, or is there something else that's kind of going on?
It absolutely is. There is absolutely a contagion thing, and it's very contemporary. It's very real. The numbers are increasing exponentially by thousands of % in these recent years. And a demographic that we've seen a massive increase in is amongst teenage girls. And we also have, and the chest binding and the taking of testosterone, and even early double mastectomies. So this is quite gruesome. It's real. It's here. And we are beginning to see the fallout of that. We're actually now beginning to see some detransitioning cases. And those are, and some quite high profile detransitioning cases. So I think that those are to come. As the mother of 4 children aged between 19 and 27, something that's interested me over this period, and it really is only anecdotal in many senses, is that when my 27-year-old was going through school, there were some girls who had anorexia or bulimia, and that was something that we talked about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
By the time and we did not hear of anyone being trans or confused about their gender. By the time my 19-year-old was going through high school, there were several girls and boys, but mainly girls, that were confused about their gender.
Yeah.
And we were not hearing so much about the eating disorders. They're still there, of course, but I think that that's quite an interesting phenomenon. Also, the phenomenon of just the way in which young people are identifying. Again, the shift in terms of how young people are identifying. We're hearing of 11-year-olds identifying as bisexual,
right,
when they go into high school, even being asked by the school how they identify in terms of sexual orientation. So I think the point you've got again is this point about policy. It's not hard law that's dictating it, but when you've got sex education policy saying in our schools, saying in United Kingdom schools, that the school curriculum says that we have to teach our children these things as a matter of sex or relationships education, then what we are in effect doing is introducing concepts to our young children, age 4, age 5, age 6, and we keep on repeating these concepts as they go up, and repeating and cementing these concepts as they go up. So we're actually, as part of state education, are inculcating our children in this confusion, stuff that they really don't need to hear.
Yeah.
And if teachers dare to question here in the UK, then they find themselves in trouble in the disciplinary process within school. As breaching the Equality Act, as breaching diversity codes.
Are you following fairly close some of the cases that are coming here in the United States and then in Canada? And if so, are we right behind you guys? Are we ahead of you guys on this curve? Or
I would say that we've been the leading liberalizing Western nation.
So we're looking to you.
And I would say that we in the United Kingdom, I've been here I qualified in 1988, and I've been pretty much doing this work since the mid-90s. And it was not coming thick and fast then, but it was beginning to come. But back at the turn of the century, we'd maybe have 3, 4, 5 big cases a year. Well, we are dealing with we're dealing with that sort of number of cases every week at the moment, and it's a tsunami.
Yeah.
And I used to think that when the teacher loses their job, or when the pastor when the street pastor is locked up, when these things happen, the church will awaken. Excuse me. But that hasn't happened. I sought to sound the signal. We've sought to sound the signal to other nations. And I would say that in the States, some of your states are kind of right where we are. But I've not noticed that you have quite as many egregious cases. You have egregious cases, but not quite as many. But there is some resistance in America. I feel that there's still some resistance, particularly in some states in America. Whereas in the United Kingdom and in Western Europe generally, there is very little resistance. Where we've seen some resistance in the West is with these amazing Central and Eastern European states, such as Poland, such as Hungary, and indeed even Ukraine, where we've seen pro-family policies, pro-life policies, where we've seen men and women at the heart of government really seeking to protect life and promote family and to stop the LGBT tide in schools. Now, ironically, they have been sanctioned by the European Union. They have been name called, they have been targeted, but they understand their own identity. They also understand Marxism. They understand totalitarianism, and they don't want a thought system imposed upon them. And so they are resisting. And I'm praying that in these nations, we see something really bright and beautiful emerge in terms of truth, and in terms of truth of governance, and in terms of good law in the days and years and weeks and months to come. So just to say, having said that, when I said that we were further ahead, there are some stories coming out of Canada, which it's as if Canada was behind us and is potentially like it's leapfrogging. So the kind of locking up of pastors, this stuff around conversion therapy, I feel as if they may have leapfrogged, and I don't know where the Christian resistance is there. I don't know where the Christian legal resistance is. I've seen very little of it, and it makes me very concerned.
Yeah. I'm a father of 5, and my oldest is 11.
Wonderful.
Yeah, the Lord is so good.
He
and
is.
I pray for more. And
Yes.
My oldest is 11, and he had told me the other day that the little girl down the street, he and his brothers play with quite often, and she's just maybe a year or 2 years younger than he is. And he told me the other day, he said, "Pop, my friend is telling me that she wants to marry a girl when she grows older, and that she identifies as a boy. And my instant reaction is, son, that's silly. Which I wound up saying. And I said, how does God make us? And we went back to Genesis 1. And then we talked about the fall. We talked about the hope of the gospel. We talked about Romans 1. Now, I may have some privilege right now where no one's knocking on my door to cart me off to jail or bring a lawsuit to me. But what kind of advice do you give to parents who have children and they're coming home from school or from a friend's house and they're telling their mom and dad they're identifying as Z-Zim? Or do you just tell them you need to ignore that nonsense and you call them what they are? Or is there more of a pastoral way of approaching this? How would you advise a situation like that?
Well, I think that it depends where you are in the situation. So there's obviously a pastoral response, there's obviously a local response, there's obviously a relational response. But the truth response of the church is that we need to, in a very public way, and in a public way that stands with our or either against or speaking to the public authorities, to say, we raise our children. Our children are male and female. We will not have this stuff promoted in our schools. And I say to churches, the children belong to the families, our families, and then they belong to our Christian community. And what we can't do is hand them to a state which would teach them falsehoods about who they are. And so I think that it's really important that Christian schools in the United States stay really Christian, that they don't allow the state to dictate to them how they teach what it means to be made in the image of God, what it is to be male and female. And I think that we need to keep on teaching it and keep on speaking it. And Hungary is going to an election in about 2 or 3 weeks' time now in March. It's going to an election whereby on the referendum, there's a referendum that says that LGBT ideology will not be promoted in schools. And the whole nation is voting on this. Because the party has brought that to the nation. There's been a massive cultural fight around it, but they've actually had the courage to do that. And so what I would say is we have to fight back at a public and policy level, and we must resist. Of course, pastorally and with the family, we need to love and be compassionate and be gentle, but the loving thing to do still means to speak the truth. And if that child is age 9, then that child really doesn't know that if the child's a girl and saying that she's a boy, well, that's the thing a 9-year-old might say. And how can a 9-year-old say she wants to marry another girl? The only thing that would even put that into her head is a society that's gone awry. Society that's gone wrong. The only thing that would even give a child that kind of concept is because a poisonous lie is getting into the root of the culture. And that's what we have to root out and speak against. And we have to do it boldly and compassionately, knowing that in that lies the healing of a nation. In that lies, that's the truth. And we need to speak it. In the UK now, if you are a parent that resisted that situation and were reported by someone else, you could find your children being taken away from you. We are finding ourselves in situations whereby young children are identifying in one sex at school, and if the parent resists, they are visited by social services, even the police. So it's really quite serious. If pastors or if sports teachers or others won't recognize the child in their chosen gender, then they may find themselves in trouble with authorities. But we have to collectively resist. We have to have the courage to do so. And again, this has really come about through soft law, not hard law. So, because technically, legally in the United Kingdom, the Gender Recognition Act says you cannot change your sex unless you're over 18, have lived out in the opposite sex for 2 years. That only at that point can you be legally recognized as someone in the opposite sex.
And that's the hard law?
That's the hard law.
Okay.
But but there are many cases, and our medical system, even our school education policies, all of these things follow a system whereby everyone assumes that if you say age 6, age 9, age 11, that you've changed your gender, that you've changed your gender. Right.
Is that hard law to protect that person that's self-identifying and changing? Well, one, from the ramifications of that kind of decision.
The hard law is a very, I mean, in many ways, it's an old piece of legislation now because it dates right back to 2004.
Okay.
And it hasn't been changed. So it's somebody that is an adult, over 18, lived out in the opposite sex for 2 years, so that they can have their, essentially, it's practical. It's so that their passport can change and their driving license can change, because it's a settled wish.
Here in the States, there's work being done so that schools can aid students in transition therapy, whether it be through drugs or even up to surgery. Is that kind of those type of steps being taken in the UK?
Absolutely, they are. And so we're getting puberty suppressants. But again, can you just imagine that situation whereby 10, 11-year-old, 12-year-old children are making decisions which will affect the rest of their life?
Yeah.
I mean, many people would call that child abuse.
Yeah.
And of course, the kind of thing that we are seeing, as I said, we're beginning to see the detransitioners. So we're beginning to see the medical cases.
Mary Weller, who's on staff with TruthXChange, and I, we've done a few podcasts on the subject of transgender and the whole transition. And there was one young man, his name is Jazz Janner. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yes.
And the horrid thing, from the age of 3, and they start to give him puberty blockers. And then when he was old enough for the reassignment surgery and the botched surgeries, and there's it's just such a sad story. And
that story is, it is like a real-time catastrophe, isn't it?
Yes.
As you see Jazz life unfold now, from looking actually quite pretty in a sense when young.
Right.
But now you have, but the whole family going along in this. But now, as you see Jazz living out life in the public space, and the evident, I mean, it's just evident, the unease, the unhappiness, the trauma.
Right.
You know, you've so evidently got comorbidities going on at the moment. I think there's, massive obesity going on at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just catastrophic and sad.
Yeah.
And there's going to be story after story just like that one.
Yeah. And it's sad because that's a bit suppressed, isn't it? It's suppressed through the media.
Yeah.
No one touch that.
I can tell you, Joshua, what would be wonderful to have on this podcast is we can bring to you the story of an amazing detransitioner. Her name is Libby Littlewood. She works with us at Christian Concern and X Out Loud. But just great to hear her story, and also increasing numbers of people that have moved out of, homosexuality, and just the freedom that they find in the gospel. And they all say, what Libby says is, the church should have told me. The church shouldn't have gone along with it. It was as if the church had nothing to say to me. And it was only me figuring it out with God myself that I realized that I really wasn't a boy.
I would love to be on the program. That would be great. We should really set that up.
Yeah, let's do that.
That would be fantastic. Well, and speaking of fantastic, Andrew, you have been fantastic. Thank you for coming on the program today. And
Great
thank
to
you
be
for
with you.
all the great work that you are doing. Is there anything that you would like to leave with us as far as things that we could keep you in prayer, or any information about Christian Concern that listeners should know about?
Well, it'd be great to just have you on our mailing list, you know, sign up online at Christian Concern /hello, just because it's great to have our friends in America with us, and also so that we can warn you, I believe, of stuff that's coming up for you, the stuff we're slightly ahead. So really living out a lot of this incredible thought leadership that you do at TruthXChange. I think that here in Britain, we're kind of really living it for real on the hard edge. I love being with the wonderful Peter and Rebecca Jones, and just really sitting under their leadership and under their teaching now over so many years. It's just like beautiful diamonds. It's like pearls. It's the best wisdom, the best teaching, and I really absorb it. And I suppose I cherish it so much because so often we are here at Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre on the front line, doing the battles, helping the teachers, the doctors that are in trouble, contending in Parliament against bad laws. So thank you so much for your partnership and for your friendship, and I look forward to being with you soon at the conference.